In divorce, my ex left me with nothing, and I ended up as a waitress at a hotel. Yesterday, I served a billionaire guest. When he reached out his hand, I saw the same birthmark I have on my wrist. Curious, I asked his name. He answered, and I realized it was the same as the baby I lost 30 years ago. The Windsor Hotel doesn't hire women in their 50s to serve in their prestigious restaurant. They prefer pretty young things with bright smiles and unblemished histories. But when your resume includes former Mrs. Jonathan Reeves and your references include some of the wealthiest socialites in the city, exceptions are made. Even when you're 52 with silver threading through your once auburn hair and lines around your eyes that tell stories of both laughter and grief. I'd been working here for 5 years, ever since Jonathan stripped me of everything in our divorce. The irony doesn't escape me that I now serve drinks to the same people who once sat at my dinner table. Most pretend not to recognize me. The few who do offer pitying smiles that burn worse than indifference. Olivia, you're on the VIP section tonight, Diana, the floor manager, informed me as I arrived for my shift. Mr. Morgan is staying in the penthouse. He rarely comes down to dine, but when he does, he expects perfect service and absolute discretion. I nodded, betraying no reaction. Ethan Morgan, tech billionaire, energy innovator, notoriously private. Everyone knew of him, but few knew him. I'd served celebrities and power players before. This was nothing new. The VIP dining area remained empty until precisely 8 o'clock, when he arrived alone without the usual entourage that accompanies the wealthy. Tall, with dark hair swept back from a strong forehead, he moved with quiet confidence. As I approached his table, I noticed he was younger than I expected, early 30s perhaps. "Good evening, sir. May I offer you our wine selection?" I maintained the professional detachment that had become second nature. "Water, please, still, and I'll have the chef's tasting menu." His voice was soft but decisive. I placed the menu on the table. As he reached to take it, his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a distinctive birthmark on his right wrist, a crescent moon shape, small but unmistakable. My breath caught, identical to mine, identical to the one my baby boy had when he was born prematurely 30 years ago, only to slip away hours later. The wine bottle I was holding nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. I steadied myself, but not before he noticed. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuinely concerned rather than irritated. "Yes, sir. I apologize." I regained my composure, but my heart pounded so violently I was certain he could hear it. Throughout the service, I found myself stealing glances at him. It wasn't just the birthmark. There was something hauntingly familiar in the arch of his brow, the shape of his hands. He had my eyes, not just the color, that peculiar blue-gray that looked almost silver in certain lights, but the shape, the way they crinkled slightly at the corners when he spoke to the sommelier. And there was the chin, Jonathan's chin, with that same slight cleft, the way he held his fork, precise and deliberate, just like Jonathan, no, it was impossible. My son had died. I'd held his tiny body, felt the warmth leave him. I'd buried him in a cemetery across town, in the Reeves family plot that I wasn't even welcome to visit after the divorce. I'd spent years in therapy working through the grief, the trauma, the loss that had created the first crack in my marriage to Jonathan. Yet as the evening progressed, the impossible thought grew stronger. The coincidences piled up. The age would be right, the physical similarities undeniable, and that birthmark. When he finished his meal, I cleared his plate, unable to stop myself from asking the question burning in my throat. "Sir, forgive my impertinence, but may I ask your name?" He looked startled, then amused. "You're serving me dinner, but don't know who I am?" "Your full name, I mean," I clarified, heart hammering. Ethan James Morgan," he replied, curious about my interest. Ethan, the name we had chosen, the name on a tiny gravestone I hadn't seen in years. The world tilted beneath my feet. "Thank you, sir," I managed, turning away before he could see the shock on my face. In the kitchen, I braced myself against the wall, breathing deeply. Coincidence. It had to be. People shared names. Birthmarks weren't unique identifiers. I was projecting, seeing connections where none existed because of unresolved grief. Yet when I returned with his coffee, I noticed how he absently rubbed that birthmark while reading something on his phone, exactly as I did with mine when deep in thought, The same unconscious gesture. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Morgan?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady, despite the chaos inside me. He looked up, studying my face with an intensity that felt like recognition, though that was surely my imagination. "Have we met before? Something about you seems familiar." "I don't believe so, sir," I replied. "I've worked at the Windsor for 5 years. Before that, I was married. My husband was Jonathan Reeves, the attorney." The words tasted bitter, as they always did. His expression changed subtly. "Reeves? From Harrington and Reeves?" "Yes. Do you know him?" I asked, suddenly wary. "By reputation only," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you for your excellent service tonight, Ms. Reeves. Olivia Reeves." I'd kept Jonathan's name after the divorce, not out of sentimentality, but because changing all my documentation seemed like yet another defeat. As I walked away, I felt his eyes following me. When I glanced back, he was staring at his wrist, then at me, a puzzled expression crossing his face. That night, I couldn't sleep. The impossible thought had taken root and wouldn't let go. I pulled out the small box of mementos I'd managed to keep after the divorce, the few tangible remembrances of my baby, his hospital bracelet, a lock of fine dark hair, the only photograph, grainy and heartbreaking, of his perfect tiny face. And there it was, visible even in the poor quality image, the same crescent moon birthmark on his right wrist, exactly where Ethan Morgan's was, exactly where mine is. Tomorrow, he would check out of the hotel. Tomorrow, I might lose the chance to know the truth. Whatever that truth might be, however impossible it seemed, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wouldn't survive losing him twice. I arrived at work 3 hours early the next day, my mind racing with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. I'd spent the night alternating between telling myself I was delusional and plotting how to approach Mr. Morgan without sounding like a desperate, possibly unhinged woman. The hotel record showed he wasn't checking out until evening, a small mercy that gave me time. Diana arrived to find me meticulously polishing already spotless glasses, startling her with my uncharacteristic early appearance. "Olivia, everything okay?" Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. In 5 years, I'd never arrived early without being scheduled. "Couldn't sleep," I offered, which wasn't a lie. Thought I'd get a head start. She seemed satisfied with this explanation, if puzzled. "Mr. Morgan requested breakfast in his suite rather than the restaurant. He specifically asked for you to serve." My heart stuttered. "For me? Did he say why?" "No, but the penthouse guests get what they want," she said, handing me the order slip. "And Olivia? Whatever's going on with you today, keep it professional. Mr. Morgan is one of our most important clients." I nodded, taking the service elevator to the penthouse level, my pulse racing as I pushed the room service cart. The weight of the small photograph in my pocket seemed to burn against my thigh. I'd brought it impulsively, though I had no plan for how or even whether to show it. When Ethan Morgan opened the door, he was already dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, looking like he'd been awake for hours. "Ms. Reeves," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming up yourself." "Of course, Mr. Morgan." I wheeled the cart to the dining table overlooking the city skyline, acutely aware of his eyes following me. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yes, join me." My carefully constructed professional mask nearly slipped. "I beg your pardon?" "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." I hesitated. This went against every hotel protocol, but curiosity overrode caution. I sat gingerly on the edge of the chair as he took his seat. "I rarely forget a face, Ms. Reeves," he began, studying me intently. "Yet I couldn't place why you seemed familiar until this morning." He reached for his phone, turning it to show me a web page. It was an old Society page photograph from at least 20 years ago. Jonathan and me at a charity gala, both smiling for the camera. I barely recognized the woman I had been, polished and confident in expensive pearls, standing beside the man who would eventually discard me like an outdated accessory. "You were a pianist," he continued, "before you married Jonathan Reeves." I stiffened. "Yes, a lifetime ago. I was researching Reeves after our conversation. His name has come up in connection with some legal matters I'm dealing with." His tone was casual, but his eyes remained sharp. "That's when I found this. Mr. Morgan, I don't understand what this has to do with me serving your breakfast." I tried to sound merely confused rather than defensive. He leaned forward slightly. Last night, you noticed my birthmark. It wasn't a question. I remained silent. The same birthmark you have, he added, nodding toward my wrist, where my sleeve had pulled back slightly. My breath caught. I instinctively covered it with my other hand. A crescent moon, he continued. Relatively rare as birthmarks go. I researched it once. Less than 1% of the population has identifiable shaped birthmarks, and crescents are among the least common. Mr. Morgan, you asked my name with unusual interest. You've been watching me since I arrived, and this morning I find that you're the ex-wife of a man whose firm has been trying to secure my business for months. His voice remained calm, but his implication was clear. Why are you interested in me, Ms. Reeves? The moment balanced on a knife's edge. I could retreat into professionalism, apologize for any perceived impropriety, and walk away. The safe choice, the sane choice. Instead, I reached into my pocket and placed the photograph on the table between us. This is why. He picked it up, his expression changing from suspicion to confusion as he studied the grainy hospital image of a newborn infant. I don't understand, he said finally. My son, I said, my voice barely steady. Born prematurely 30 years ago, he lived for only a few hours, or so I was told. I took a deep breath. His name was Ethan. Ethan Jonathan Reeves. His eyes snapped to mine, widening slightly. He had a birthmark, I continued, touching my wrist. Just like yours, just like mine. Morgan set the photograph down carefully, as if it might shatter. What exactly are you suggesting, Ms. Reeves? I don't know, I admitted. It sounds insane, even to me. But the coincidences, I gestured helplessly. The birthmark, the age, the name, even your features. You have my eyes, Jonathan's chin. He stood abruptly, turning to face the window. I was born to Helen and James Morgan. I've seen my birth certificate. This is... He stopped, shaking his head. I understand how this sounds, I said quietly. But before you dismiss it completely, ask yourself why you requested me specifically this morning. Something made you curious, too. His shoulders tensed. He turned back, his expression now carefully controlled. I was adopted, he said finally. My parents told me when I was 16. But my birth certificate still lists Helen as my biological mother. There was never any mention of this scenario you're describing. The admission sent a jolt through me, possibility crystallizing into something more solid. When's your birthday? I asked. April 14th. My heart stopped. My son was born on April 14th, 1995. He sank slowly back into his chair. This is impossible. Yes, I agreed. And yet, we sat in silence, the untouched breakfast cooling between us. Who was your doctor? He finally asked. When you gave birth? Dr. Sarah Winters. She was an obstetrics specialist at University Medical Center. Something flickered across his face. Helen, my mother, was an obstetrician at University Medical. She worked with a Sarah Winters. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Helen Morgan, I whispered, the name suddenly familiar. I remember her. She was there that night. She came in after they told me my baby didn't make it. He stood again, agitation evident in his movements. This doesn't make sense. Why would my mother... He stopped, correcting himself. Why would Helen and your husband... Jonathan never wanted children, I said, old pain surfacing. When I got pregnant, he was disappointed. When the baby came early, with potential health complications, I couldn't finish the thought. Ethan paced the room, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Jonathan's that it sent another shock of recognition through me. I need to verify this, he said finally. All business now. DNA testing, medical records. If what you're suggesting is true, I know, I interrupted, reality crashing down. Mr. Morgan, I didn't come here to disrupt your life. I don't want anything from you. I needed to know. He studied me for a long moment. What exactly did they tell you happened to your baby? That he was too premature, that his lungs weren't developed enough. My voice caught. I held him. He was so small but perfect. They said he died in my arms, but I was heavily medicated. Everything was a blur. Something changed in his expression. A softening, or perhaps recognition of the pain I'd carried for 30 years. I have to go to my meetings, he said finally. But I'm staying another night. We'll talk again this evening. I nodded, gathering myself to leave. Ms. Reeves, Olivia, he added as I reached the door. Don't speak to anyone about this. Not yet. I understood the warning in his tone. I won't. Back in the service elevator, I pressed my forehead against the cool metal wall, breathing deeply. I had just potentially turned this man's life upside down with an impossible claim. And yet, the coincidences were too numerous, too specific to dismiss. If my son hadn't died that night, if Jonathan had somehow arranged this unthinkable deception, the thought that had begun as a whisper now thundered through me. I might have found my child, the child I had grieved for 30 years, the child whose loss had broken something fundamental inside me. And if true, someone would have to answer for 3 decades of lies. The rest of my shift passed in a fog. I moved through my duties mechanically, serving drinks and clearing tables while my mind churned with possibilities. Several times, Diana caught me staring into space and shot me concerned looks. I couldn't blame her. I was barely present, my thoughts orbiting around the penthouse suite and the man who might be my long-lost son. At 2 o'clock, I took my break and slipped away to a quiet corner of the staff room, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. I searched Helen Morgan Obstetrician and found several old articles from medical journals. One included a photograph from 1995, the year my son was born, showing Dr. Helen Morgan receiving an award for excellence in neonatal care. The irony was almost too bitter to bear. I studied her face, a handsome woman with sharp features and intelligent eyes. Nothing in her expression suggested someone capable of participating in the theft of an infant. But then again, what would such a person look like? My break ended too quickly. As I returned to the restaurant floor, I nearly collided with a well-dressed man exiting the elevator. "Excuse me," I murmured, stepping aside. He turned, and recognition hit us both simultaneously. "Olivia?" Jonathan Reeves, my ex-husband, stood before me, looking as shocked as I felt. 20 years of marriage, 5 years of bitter divorce, and now we were strangers occupying the same space. "Jonathan." I managed to keep my voice neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. What was he doing here? The coincidence seemed impossible, given my morning's conversation. "I didn't know you worked here." His gaze swept over my uniform, his expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. "There's a lot you don't know about my life now." I straightened, refusing to shrink under his assessment. "Are you staying at the hotel?" "No, just had a meeting." He glanced at his watch, the same ostentatious Rolex he'd worn during our marriage. Some things never changed. "With Ethan Morgan, actually." My blood froze. "Mr. Morgan?" "Yes. Hoping to bring his company on as a client. Big fish." Jonathan's smile was smug. Success had always been his aphrodisiac, though he seemed distracted today. Meeting ended early. I fought to keep my expression neutral. "I should get back to work." "Of course." He hesitated, then added with practiced magnanimity, "You look well, Olivia." Before I could respond, he was walking away, his Italian leather shoes clicking across the marble floor. I watched him go. This man I'd once loved, this man who might have orchestrated the cruelest deception imaginable. Had he just come from meeting with Ethan? Had they discussed business as if they were strangers, while Jonathan knew, had always known, that he was sitting across from his biological son? The thought made me physically ill. I managed to finish my shift without incident, though Diana continued to watch me with concern. As I clocked out, she approached me. "Olivia, is everything all right? You've been off all day." "Just not feeling well," I lied. "Might be coming down with something." "Take care of yourself," she said, genuine concern in her voice. "And if you need to talk." I nodded gratefully and hurried away before she could press further. Outside, evening was falling, the city lights beginning to sparkle against the darkening sky. I checked my phone and found a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park, the Boat Basin Cafe, 1 hour. M." My apartment was only a short subway ride away, giving me just enough time to change out of my uniform before meeting Ethan. I opted for simple clothes, jeans, a blue sweater, minimal makeup. Part of me wanted to look my best, but another part understood that this wasn't a social meeting. This was, what, a reckoning? An investigation? The Boat Basin Cafe was relatively quiet for a weeknight. Ethan sat at a corner table, wearing casual clothes and a baseball cap that partially obscured his face, a far cry from the polished businessman I'd served that morning. A subtle disguise, I realized, to avoid recognition. He stood as I approached, gesturing for me to sit. A bottle of sparkling water and 2 glasses were already on the table. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low. I thought a neutral location would be better. Did you have your meeting with Jonathan today? I asked without preamble. Surprise flickered across his face. How did you know about that? I ran into him at the hotel. He mentioned meeting with you. Ethan's expression darkened. Yes, it was scheduled weeks ago before all this. I nearly canceled but decided it might be informative. And was it? He has no idea who I am. Ethan's fingers tapped restlessly against his glass. Or if he does, he's an exceptional actor. He spent 30 minutes trying to convince me to hire his firm, talking about his expertise in energy sector regulations, never a flicker of recognition. That sounds like Jonathan, I said bitterly. Compartmentalizes everything, always focused on the next deal. Ethan studied me intently. Tell me about him. About your marriage. I took a deep breath. We met when I was 21. I was a promising pianist, just starting my career. He was a young attorney with ambition to burn. Charming, brilliant, persuasive. I fell hard. I smiled ruefully. We married quickly. I got pregnant within a year. And he didn't want the baby? Ethan's voice was carefully controlled. He said the timing was wrong. His career was taking off. Children would come later, when we were established. The old pain resurfaced. When I insisted on keeping the pregnancy, he eventually came around, or seemed to. But when complications arose, when the baby came early, what exactly happened that night? Ethan leaned forward, intent. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing myself back to the worst night of my life. I went into labor at 26 weeks. They rushed me to University Medical. Everything was chaotic, terrifying. I remember Jonathan arguing with someone in the hallway while they prepped me for delivery. I took a sip of water, steadying myself. The delivery itself is hazy. They had me heavily sedated. I remember the cry, so small, but definitely a cry. They showed me the baby briefly, this tiny, perfect being. I saw the birthmark then, just like mine. I touched my wrist unconsciously. Then they took him away for treatment. Hours later, Dr. Winters came in with a small bundle, said there had been complications, that you hadn't made it. My voice broke. I held you, him, and said goodbye. They gave me more sedatives after that. I woke up the next day, and it was over. We buried a tiny casket 3 days later. Ethan's face had gone pale. I'm sorry, he said quietly, that you went through that. I need to know, I whispered. Did you find anything today? Anything to confirm or disprove this? He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I've been researching Helen all day. Found her journals in a box at my childhood home last year after she passed away. I never read them fully until today. He scrolled to a photo of a handwritten page and pushed the phone toward me. The entry was dated April 14th, 1995. The Morgan baby became a reality today. Such a beautiful boy, perfect despite his early arrival. James is overjoyed, already planning fishing trips and baseball games. If only he knew the price of this miracle. Sarah says the mother believes he didn't survive. A necessary deception, for everyone's benefit. The child will have a better life with us than with a father who doesn't want him and a mother too young and traumatized to cope. I tell myself this is an act of mercy, not theft. God forgive me if I'm wrong. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a sob. The confirmation I'd both hoped for and dreaded. Oh my God, there's more, Ethan said grimly. Years of entries about her guilt, about watching me grow while knowing another woman was grieving my loss. About Jonathan making contributions to her research in exchange for her silence. He paid her. Rage and grief collided inside me. He paid her to steal my child? It seems that way. Ethan's voice was tight with controlled anger. I've already contacted a lab for DNA testing, though after reading this, I have little doubt about the results. I stared at him, truly seeing the features I should have recognized years ago. My eyes, Jonathan's chin, the same widow's peak that my father had. My son, alive, successful, a stranger. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Now, he said, a cold determination settling over his features. We decide how Jonathan Reeves will pay for what he's done to both of us. The cafe's ambient noise faded around us as we sat in silence, two people connected by blood and severed by betrayal, contemplating the shape of retribution. I don't want revenge, I said finally, surprising myself with the truth of it. I just want to know my son. Something shifted in his expression, a softening perhaps, or recognition. That might be the more difficult path, he said quietly, for both of us. As we sat there, connected by impossible truths and 30 years of lies, I realized that finding him had been the easy part. The real challenge would be finding our way forward from this fractured beginning. 3 days passed in a surreal haze. Ethan checked out of the hotel as scheduled, but rented a private apartment nearby. We agreed to wait for the DNA results before taking any action, though neither of us harbored real doubt about what they would reveal. The truth already lived in the mirrored shape of our birthmarks, in the identical arch of our eyebrows, in the resonance of shared mannerisms we couldn't have learned from each other. I continued my shifts at the Windsor, moving through the motions while my mind remained fixated on the impossible reality unfolding in my life. Diana noticed my distraction, but seemed to attribute it to my encounter with Jonathan. Exes have a way of stirring up old ghosts, she said sympathetically, when she caught me staring into space again. Ghosts. Yes, but this particular ghost had materialized into flesh and blood, disrupting everything I thought I knew about my life. On the 4th day, I received another text from Ethan. Results are in. Meet me at my apartment at 7, address below. The apartment was in a secure building overlooking the park, temporary accommodation that nonetheless exuded the quiet luxury I was coming to associate with Ethan. When he opened the door, I was struck again by the uncanny reflection of my own features in his face. How had I not seen it immediately? How had no one ever commented on our resemblance? Thank you for coming, he said formally, ushering me inside. The space was minimally furnished but comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city at dusk. On the coffee table lay an opened envelope. Ethan gestured for me to sit, then handed me the papers inside. 99.99998% probability of maternal relationship, I read aloud, my voice catching. Though I'd been certain, seeing the scientific confirmation rendered me momentarily speechless. There's no doubt, Ethan said, sitting across from me. You are my biological mother, and Jonathan Reeves is my biological father. I set down the papers, overwhelmed by the finality of it. What do you want to do now? I've been thinking about that constantly, he admitted. Part of me wants to confront Jonathan immediately, demand answers, make him face what he's done. His fingers clenched around his water glass. But that would be impulsive, and I don't build billion-dollar companies by being impulsive. The pragmatism in this statement was so reminiscent of Jonathan that it sent a small shock through me. Nature versus nurture playing out in real time. I've compiled everything, Ethan continued, nodding toward his laptop. Helen's journals, the DNA results, hospital records I've managed to obtain. There's enough evidence to pursue criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, falsification of documents. The statute of limitations might be an issue for some charges, but not all. You want to have him arrested? The thought had never occurred to me. I want him to face consequences, Ethan corrected, whether through legal channels or otherwise. I studied him, this man who was my son, yet not entirely mine. Raised by different parents, shaped by different experiences, yet carrying my DNA, my birthmark, my eyes. What about Helen? I asked quietly. Her role in this? Pain flashed across his face. Helen is gone. She died last year. Pancreatic cancer. He looked away briefly. I can't confront her, can't ask why she participated in this theft, and part of me is grateful for that. Because you loved her, I said, understanding immediately. Because despite everything, she was your mother. Yes, his voice was rough with emotion. She raised me, loved me, was proud of me. Everything I've accomplished, I owe partly to her and James. He met my gaze directly. I've spent days reconciling those truths with what I now know she did to you. The complexity of his position struck me forcefully. While I had lost a child, he had gained a history he never knew existed. His foundation had been shaken just as profoundly as mine. What about Sarah Winters? I asked. She's still alive. She was directly involved. I've located her, Ethan said. She's in an assisted living facility upstate, early-stage Alzheimer's. Her lucidity varies day to day. I want to see her, I said immediately, surprising myself with the certainty. I need to hear from her directly why she participated in this. Ethan nodded slowly. I've already arranged it. We can drive up tomorrow, if you're willing. The decisiveness of his actions reminded me again of Jonathan, the efficiency, the strategic thinking. But there was a consideration in his manner that his father had always lacked. I wondered if that came from Helen, or if it was uniquely his own. "There's something else," he said, reaching for a folder on the side table. While investigating, I discovered some disturbing information about Jonathan's current activities. He spread several documents before me: financial statements, emails, legal briefs. His firm has been engaging in questionable practices for years, helping clients evade environmental regulations, burying evidence in class action lawsuits, facilitating offshore tax schemes that skirt legality. "That sounds like Jonathan," I said bitterly. Ethics were always flexible when money was involved. "These documents could destroy his career," Ethan said evenly. "His firm is currently bidding for several major contracts, including one with my company. I've been delaying my decision, using it as a reason to meet with him again next week." I understood then the shape of his strategy. "You're going to confront him." "We are," he corrected. "If you're willing, I believe we deserve answers face to face." The thought of confronting Jonathan sent a cold shiver through me. The man had demolished me twice, first by orchestrating the death of our child, then through our vicious divorce years later. I'd spent 5 years avoiding him, rebuilding a modest life from the ashes he'd left me in. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," I admitted. "You survived believing your child was dead for 30 years, Ethan said quietly. "You survived losing everything in your divorce. You rebuilt your life working in a hotel where you serve people who used to be your peers. That doesn't sound like weakness to me." His assessment, so direct, so perceptive, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'd grown accustomed to being invisible, to having my strength go unrecognized. To hear it acknowledged by this man who was my son felt like a validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "When I started investigating this," Ethan continued, "I expected to feel only anger toward Jonathan. And I do feel that, but I've also found myself increasingly angry on your behalf. His gaze was intense, determined. What he did to me was unconscionable. What he did to you was cruel, beyond measure." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. "We'll take this at your pace," he assured me. "But I think confronting Jonathan together is the only way we both get closure." "Together," I repeated softly, testing the word. For 30 years I'd faced every challenge alone. The concept of having an ally, especially one connected to me by blood, felt foreign, yet deeply right. "Tomorrow we'll see Sarah Winters," I decided, finding my resolve. "And then we'll plan how to face Jonathan." Ethan nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. As the city lights sparkled into life outside his windows, we began to outline our approach, mother and son united by blood and betrayal, plotting the reckoning that was 30 years overdue. Later, as I prepared to leave, Ethan hesitated at the door. "I've wondered something," he said. "If you had known I was alive all these years, how would my life have been different?" The question, so vulnerable, so fundamental, caught me off guard. "I would have raised you with music," I said finally, the truth rising unbidden. "I would have loved you imperfectly but completely. I would have taught you that your worth isn't measured by achievements or possessions." I paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "But I can't say your life would have been better. Only different." He absorbed this, nodding slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." As I stepped into the hallway, the weight of 3 decades of grief and the tentative possibility of healing followed me like twin shadows into the night. The assisted living facility was nestled in the Hudson Valley, surrounded by autumn foliage ablaze in red and gold. Ethan drove us there in a modest sedan rather than the luxury car I had expected. "Less conspicuous," he explained. We spoke little during the 2-hour journey, each lost in our own thoughts about the confrontation ahead. I studied him covertly as he drove, noting how he held the wheel at precisely 10 and 2, how he checked his mirrors at regular intervals, methodical, precise. Was this learned behavior or something inherited from Jonathan, who had the same exacting nature? The question of nature versus nurture had never felt so immediate, so personal. "The facility director says she's having a good day," Ethan said as we pulled into the parking lot. "Relatively lucid. That can change quickly, though." I nodded, suddenly nervous. "What have you told her about why we're visiting?" "Nothing specific, just that we have questions about a case from her past." He turned to face me. "Are you ready for this?" No, I wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready to face the woman who had helped steal their child? But I nodded anyway. The facility was bright and well-maintained, smelling of disinfectant and artificial flowers. A staff member led us to a sunroom where a thin, white-haired woman sat gazing out at the gardens. Dr. Sarah Winters had aged dramatically from the competent physician I remembered, her once sharp features now sunken, her hands trembling slightly as they rested in her lap. "Dr. Winters," the attendant said gently, "your visitors are here." She turned, her faded blue eyes taking us in with mild curiosity. "Hello," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Do I know you?" Ethan took the lead, sitting in a chair across from her. "My name is Ethan Morgan. This is Olivia Reeves. We wanted to ask you about something that happened at University Medical Center in 1995. Her expression remained pleasant, but vacant. "I worked there for many years. So many babies delivered. So many mothers." She smiled vaguely. "All blurs together now." I moved closer, my heart pounding. "Dr. Winters, do you remember Olivia Reeves? I delivered a premature baby boy in April 1995. You told me he died." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, then quickly masked alarm. "I'm sorry for your loss, dear. It happens with premature infants, despite our best efforts." "Except he didn't die," I said, my voice low but steady. "He's sitting right here beside me." Sarah's gaze darted to Ethan, then back to me, her composure cracking slightly. I'm not sure what you're talking about." Ethan leaned forward, deliberately pushing back his sleeve to reveal the crescent birthmark on his wrist. "I think you do, Dr. Winters. I think you remember this birthmark. I think you remember helping Dr. Helen Morgan take me from my biological mother and falsifying death records." The color drained from her face. Her hands began to tremble more violently. "Helen," she whispered. "Is she passed away last year," Ethan said. "But she left journals, detailed journals." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. When she opened them again, the vague pleasantness was gone, replaced by a sharp clarity. "You have to understand," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "It wasn't a simple case of theft." "Then explain it to me," I challenged, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Explain why you told me my baby was dead when he wasn't." Sarah's gaze shifted between us, calculating. Finally she sighed. "Your husband approached me first," she said, addressing me. "Weeks before the delivery. He knew the pregnancy was high risk, said he was exploring options." "Options?" The word tasted bitter. "He didn't want a child with potential disabilities," she said bluntly. "The earlier the birth, the higher the risk of complications. He asked what might happen if the child was born with significant problems." Nausea rose in my throat. "And you told him what?" I explained the potential complications of extreme prematurity, but I also told him that many premature infants develop normally with proper care. Her expression hardened. That's when he mentioned Helen, said she'd recently lost a pregnancy and was desperate for a child, suggested an arrangement that would benefit everyone. "Benefit everyone?" Ethan repeated incredulously. "You mean benefit him and the Morgans?" Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. He was very persuasive, talked about how the child would have advantages with the Morgans that he couldn't provide. How Olivia was too young, too focused on her music career to properly care for a potentially special needs child. "That wasn't his decision to make," I said, fury building inside me. "And it certainly wasn't yours." "No, it wasn't," she agreed softly. "But you have to understand my position. Jonathan Reeves knew about a case I had mishandled years earlier, a mistake that could have ended my career. He made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, he would ensure I never practiced medicine again." "So you chose your career over my child," I said, the words like glass in my throat. "I chose what seemed like the best solution for everyone at the time," she countered weakly. "The baby would go to parents who desperately wanted him. You would be spared the potential heartache of raising a disabled child. And yes, I would keep my career." "Except the baby wasn't disabled," Ethan interjected. "I was perfectly healthy despite being premature." Sarah nodded slowly. "We knew that within hours of your birth, but by then, the plan was already in motion. The Morgans had falsified documents ready, claiming Helen had given birth while traveling. Jonathan had already told Olivia you hadn't survived." Her gaze shifted to me. "You were so heavily sedated, so distraught. The small bundle you held, it wasn't your son." The memory of that small, still form in my arms, the child I had grieved for 30 years, shattered like glass. "What did I hold?" I whispered. "A stillborn from earlier that day," she admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "The parents had chosen not to see their baby. We repurposed it. I stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air, the casual cruelty of it all, the calculated deception, the manipulation of my grief threatened to overwhelm me. I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, fighting for composure. Behind me, Ethan continued the questioning. Did the Morgans know about Jonathan's coercion? Did they know you were being blackmailed into this arrangement? Helen knew something wasn't right, Sarah admitted, but she convinced herself it was for the best. James, I don't think he ever knew the full truth. He believed the adoption was legitimate, if unorthodox. And the payments? Ethan pressed. Helen's journals mentioned contributions to her research. Sarah's face tightened. Jonathan paid handsomely for everyone's silence. Regular donations to Helen's neonatal research unit. A cabin in the Adirondacks for me. Her voice cracked with shame. I've had 30 years to regret accepting it. I turned back from the window, composed enough now to face her. Did you ever consider telling me the truth? All those years, knowing what you'd done? She met my gaze directly for the first time. Once, about a year after I saw you at a fundraiser. You looked haunted. I almost approached you then. But Jonathan was at your side, watching everything, everyone. I knew what he was capable of. You were afraid of him, I realized. Yes. Her admission was barely audible. He made it clear that if the truth ever came out, he would destroy not just my career, but my life. And I believed him. Well, now the truth is out, Ethan said, his voice hard. And someone will face consequences. Fear flashed across Sarah's face. What are you going to do? We haven't decided yet, I said, finding strength in the plural pronoun. But Jonathan will answer for what he's done. Sarah nodded slowly, resignation evident in her posture. I deserve whatever comes. I've lived with this guilt for 30 years, watching my memories slip away while this one remains crystal clear. Her roomy eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Olivia, for everything we took from you. As we left her sitting in the sunroom, small and diminished in the autumn light, I felt no satisfaction, no closure, only a profound sadness for the irretrievable years lost to all of us through one man's selfish decision. In the car, Ethan was quiet, processing everything we'd learned. Finally, he said, she confirmed what we already suspected. Jonathan orchestrated all of it. Yes, I agreed. And now we know exactly what we're confronting him with. Ethan started the car, his expression hardening with resolve. I've decided to move up our meeting with him. Tomorrow. No more waiting. As we drove back toward the city, I realized that tomorrow would bring the culmination of 30 years of unknowing grief and the beginning of whatever came after. Jonathan's corner office at Harrington and Reeves occupied the 42nd floor of a gleaming midtown tower, a testament to his rise in the legal world since our divorce. The receptionist, a polished young woman with a practiced smile, brightened visibly when Ethan announced himself. Mr. Morgan, Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Her gaze slid to me with mild curiosity. I don't believe we have an appointment for your companion. She's with me, Ethan said simply, with the quiet authority of someone unaccustomed to having his decisions questioned. The receptionist hesitated only briefly before nodding. Of course, please follow me. As we were led down a hallway lined with expensive art and award plaques, I felt strangely calm. The anger and grief that had churned within me for days had crystallized into something harder, colder, a diamond-sharp clarity of purpose. Jonathan rose from behind his massive desk when we entered, his practiced smile freezing when he saw me. Ethan, he said, recovering quickly. I wasn't expecting you to bring company. His eyes narrowed slightly. Olivia, what an unusual surprise. Is it really a surprise, Jonathan? I asked quietly. He glanced between us, wariness creeping into his expression. I'm afraid I don't follow. I think you do, Ethan said, closing the door firmly behind us. But let's not waste time with pretense. We've had a very illuminating conversation with Dr. Sarah Winters yesterday. All color drained from Jonathan's face. For a moment, he resembled the ghost I'd imagined when I thought of confronting him. Insubstantial, haunted. Then his lawyer's composure reasserted itself. I'm not sure what you think you know, but we know everything, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. We know about your arrangement with Helen Morgan. We know you bribed and blackmailed medical professionals to fake our son's death. We know you orchestrated the most cruel, inhumane deception imaginable. Jonathan sank slowly back into his chair, his expression unreadable. These are serious allegations, Olivia. Completely unfounded. Are they? Ethan stepped forward, placing a folder on Jonathan's desk. We have Helen Morgan's journals detailing the arrangement. We have Sarah Winter's confession. And we have DNA tests confirming that I am the biological son of Olivia and Jonathan Reeves. He leaned forward slightly. Your son. Jonathan stared at the folder but didn't touch it, as if it might burn him. This is absurd. Some kind of elaborate scam. Look at me, Jonathan, I commanded, stepping closer. Look at him. Are you really going to sit there and deny what's plainly written in our faces? The same eyes, the same birthmark. I pushed up my sleeve to reveal my crescent moon mark, as Ethan did the same. Jonathan's gaze darted between us, the resemblance undeniable when presented so starkly. His facade cracked further. This is a private matter, he said, voice lowered. Whatever you think happened 30 years ago. It's not what we think happened, Ethan cut in coldly. It's what we know happened. The question is, what happens now? Something calculating entered Jonathan's expression, the look I recognized from our divorce negotiations when he was assessing angles and risks. What exactly do you want? Money? Some kind of public apology? The casual way he offered compensation for 3 decades of orchestrated grief ignited a fierce rage within me. You think you can buy your way out of this? Pay us off like you paid Helen and Sarah? Be reasonable, Olivia, Jonathan said, his tone maddeningly condescending. What's done is done. Dragging this into the public eye benefits no one. It might benefit the countless other lives you've damaged, Ethan interjected, opening the second folder he carried. Your firm's ethical violations make for fascinating reading. Environmental regulations circumvented, evidence suppressed in class action lawsuits, offshore accounts manipulating tax laws. He spread several documents across the desk. Did you really think I was considering hiring your firm without doing my due diligence? Jonathan's expression hardened as he realized the full scope of our leverage. You're threatening me. We're offering you a choice, I corrected, finding unexpected strength in the moment. A choice you never gave me regarding my son. Ethan nodded. Option 1, we take everything we have, about the fraud surrounding my birth and about your firm's ethical violations, to the authorities and the media. Your career ends, your reputation is destroyed, you potentially face criminal charges. And option 2? Jonathan asked, his voice tight. You provide a complete signed confession about what you did 30 years ago, I said. You acknowledge Ethan as your biological son. You make restitution for what you stole from both of us. Restitution? Jonathan's eyebrows rose. You mean money? I don't want your money, I said with genuine disdain. I want justice. I want the truth acknowledged. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze boring into Jonathan's. As for my part, I want you to resign from your firm, effective immediately, withdraw from legal practice entirely, and transfer your ownership stake in Harrington and Reeves to a foundation that will provide legal services to mothers separated from their children through deception or coercion. Jonathan stared at him, momentarily speechless. You're asking me to give up everything I've built. You're getting off lightly, Ethan replied without sympathy. What you did was criminal. You should be in prison. This is extortion, Jonathan said, desperation edging into his voice. No, I countered. This is the consequence of choices you made 30 years ago, choices that devastated lives. I held a dead baby in my arms, believing it was my son, Jonathan. I grieved for 30 years while you knew the truth every single day. Something shifted in Jonathan's expression. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the closest approximation he was capable of. I did what I thought was best at the time, he said quietly. The pregnancy was unexpected. Our marriage was already strained. When the baby came early, with all the potential complications, it seemed like an elegant solution. An elegant solution? I repeated, incredulous. You stole my child and made me believe he was dead. There was nothing elegant about it. It was monstrous. Helen and James Morgan provided him with opportunities we couldn't have, Jonathan argued, gesturing toward Ethan. Look at what he's accomplished. Would that have been possible if he'd been raised by a struggling musician and an attorney just starting his career? That wasn't your decision to make, I said. The simple truth of it, cutting through his rationalizations. He was our son, my son. And now here we are, Ethan said coldly. 30 years later, with your chickens coming home to roost. What's your decision, Jonathan? Public disgrace or private restitution? Jonathan's gaze moved between us, calculating odds and outcomes as he always did. I could almost see the wheels turning behind his eyes, searching for a third option, an escape route, a legal technicality that might save him. Finding none, he seemed to physically diminish, his shoulders sagging slightly. I'll need time to draft the confession, to arrange the transfer of my ownership shares. You have 48 hours, Ethan said, all business now. We'll have our attorneys review everything. And if I refuse, a last, desperate attempt, then by this time next week, your name will be synonymous with one of the most heartless frauds in recent memory, I said simply. Your choice. As we turned to leave, Jonathan called out, Olivia. I paused at the door, looking back. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for the arrangement itself, but for your pain. It was never meant to hurt you. The audacity of his qualified apology left me momentarily speechless. 30 years of grief reduced to an afterthought, an unintended consequence. Your intent doesn't matter, Jonathan, I said finally. Only your actions, and the lives you damaged with them. As we left his office, I felt lighter somehow, as if setting down a burden I'd carried so long I'd forgotten its weight. In the elevator, Ethan stood beside me, our reflections ghost-like in the polished brass doors. Mother and son, 30 years lost, yet somehow found again. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Yes, I realized with some surprise. For the first time in a very long time, I think I am. The truth was out. Jonathan would face consequences, and most importantly, my son was alive, standing beside me as we descended toward whatever future awaited us. The 48 hours after our confrontation with Jonathan passed in a strange limbo. I took personal days from the hotel, unable to face the routine of serving others while my own life hung in such delicate balance. Ethan buried himself in work, though he called each evening to check on me, our conversations gradually becoming less formal, more natural. We spoke about small things, his preference for classical music, a connection that thrilled me, my love of gardening, books we had both read. Carefully navigating around the enormity of our situation, we began the tentative process of knowing each other as people, not just as biological relatives linked by betrayal. He'll try to find a way out, Ethan said during one call, abruptly returning to the subject we'd been avoiding. Men like Jonathan don't surrender power easily. I know, I replied, remembering all too well Jonathan's tactics during our divorce. But you've backed him into a corner. We have, Ethan corrected gently. The plural pronoun still startled me, the acknowledgement that we were in this together, a unit formed through extraordinary circumstances. On the morning the ultimatum expired, Jonathan's attorney delivered a thick envelope to Ethan's apartment, where I had joined him to await the response. Inside was a notarized confession detailing the entire scheme, from Jonathan's initial approach to Helen and Sarah through the elaborate deception and subsequent cover-up. It included an acknowledgement of Ethan as his biological son and a formal apology for the suffering caused. A separate document confirmed the transfer of Jonathan's considerable ownership stake in Harrington and Reeves to a newly established foundation, with terms that would allow Ethan and me to direct its mission. He actually did it, I whispered, stunned by the comprehensive capitulation. He had no choice, Ethan said, though he too seemed slightly surprised by Jonathan's full compliance. His entire identity is wrapped up in his professional reputation. This was his only option to salvage anything. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the final page. I expect complete confidentiality in return for these concessions. What's done is done. Let us all move forward with our lives. J.R. No apology. No request to know his biological son. Just a businessman concluding an uncomfortable transaction. Always transactional, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Even now, Ethan's expression remained impassive, but I noticed the slight tension in his jaw, an echo of Jonathan's own tell when suppressing emotion. Are you satisfied with this outcome? He asked carefully. I considered the question, turning it over like a strange artifact. Was I satisfied? Could any resolution truly compensate for 30 years of grief and loss? I don't know if satisfied is the right word, I admitted, but it's something. Acknowledgement, accountability, more than I ever expected to have. I looked up at him. What about you? He was silent for a long moment. I'm still processing what all this means for my identity, who I thought I was versus who I actually am. His fingers unconsciously traced the crescent birthmark on his wrist. I've spent the past 2 weeks wondering what my life would have been like if Jonathan had made a different choice that night. The question hung between us, impossible to answer, yet impossible to ignore. I've wondered the same thing, I said softly, every day since you walked into the Windsor. Later that afternoon, Ethan surprised me with a request. I'd like to see where you live, he said as we finished reviewing the foundation documents. If you're comfortable with that. My apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a pre-war building far from the luxury of Ethan's temporary residence. I'd felt no embarrassment about my circumstances until that moment, suddenly seeing my home through his eyes. The worn furniture saved from before the divorce, the faded prints on the walls, the small upright piano that was my one non-negotiable possession when everything else was taken. It's nothing special, I said as I unlocked the door, feeling unaccountably nervous. Ethan stepped inside, his gaze taking in everything with quiet attention. He moved to the piano immediately, running his fingers lightly across the keys without pressing them. Helen insisted I take piano lessons, he said unexpectedly. I never understood why she was so adamant about it. James wanted me to play baseball, but Helen wouldn't budge on the piano. He glanced at me. I have perfect pitch. Did you know that's often hereditary? I didn't, I said, a small piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Did you enjoy playing? Very much. Still do, though I rarely have time now. He pressed a key gently, the note hanging in the air between us. Would you play something? I've been curious about your music since you mentioned your career. I hesitated, then sat at the bench. It had been years since I'd played for anyone but myself. My fingers felt stiff at first, uncertain, but muscle memory took over as I began Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece I'd played since my conservatory days, its gentle melancholy always speaking to something deep within me. As the final notes faded, I became aware of Ethan watching me intently, an unreadable expression on his face. That was beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. I closed the piano lid gently. I was considered promising once, before I gave it up for marriage, for Jonathan's career. You could play professionally again? Ethan suggested. It's not too late. The idea was so unexpected, so outside my realm of possibility that I nearly laughed. At my age? After so many years away from it? Why not? His expression was earnest. You clearly still have the talent, and now you have resources. The foundation will provide you with financial security. You could teach, perform, whatever you wanted. The casual way he offered this second chance, this resurrection of dreams long buried, left me momentarily speechless. For 5 years, I'd focused solely on survival, on maintaining my dignity while serving those who had once been my peers. The possibility of reclaiming any part of my former self had seemed as impossible as finding my lost child. Yet here was that child, now a man, offering me the opportunity to reclaim more than just the truth of his existence. I'll think about it, I said finally, unwilling to make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Ethan nodded, respecting my hesitation. He continued exploring my apartment, pausing at the small collection of framed photographs on my bookshelf, mostly from before the divorce, my previous life preserved in frozen moments. He picked up one photo, studying it with particular intensity. Is this me? He asked quietly. I moved to his side, my heart clenching at the image, a grainy ultrasound picture in a simple silver frame. Yes, 24 weeks, the last image I had of you before. Neither of us completed the sentence. The weight of what had been stolen from both of us hung in the air, almost tangible in its presence. I'd like a copy of this, Ethan said finally, setting the frame down with careful precision. If you wouldn't mind. Of course. We stood in silence, the apartment suddenly feeling too small to contain the magnitude of our shared loss and tentative reconnection. What happens now? I asked, voicing the question that had haunted me since our confrontation with Jonathan. Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. The foundation needs direction. The legal work is just beginning. He hesitated, then added, and I'd like to get to know my mother, if she's willing. Mother. The word I'd thought would never apply to me again, not after holding that small, still bundle 30 years ago. I'd been a mother for mere hours, then a grieving almost mother for decades. Now I was being offered the chance to claim that title again, in a form I could never have imagined. She's willing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though she has no idea how to be a mother to a 30-year-old son. That makes 2 of us, Ethan replied, with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. I have no idea how to be a 30-year-old son. Perhaps we can figure it out together. Together. The word held more promise than I'd allowed myself in years. 3 months passed with startling swiftness. The newly established Reeves Foundation for Family Justice took shape under Ethan's efficient guidance and my growing involvement. We named Diana from the hotel as executive director, her organizational skills and compassion making her the perfect candidate to lead our mission of supporting families separated through deception or coercion. I gave notice at the Windsor. My resignation met with genuine congratulations from most of my colleagues who believed I'd simply landed a position with the foundation. Only Diana knew the full truth, sworn to secrecy but supportive beyond measure. You deserve this second chance, she told me on my last day, hugging me tightly. All of it. Jonathan kept his word, fading from public view with a carefully crafted story about health concerns necessitating his early retirement. The partners at Harrington and Reeves scrambled to rebrand and distance themselves from any hint of impropriety, unaware that the foundation now controlling Jonathan's shares was quietly redirecting their focus toward family justice cases. Throughout these external changes, the more significant transformation was happening between Ethan and me. Our relationship evolved gradually, carefully, like a delicate plant requiring gentle tending. We established a routine of weekly dinners, sometimes at his apartment, sometimes at mine. During these evenings, we filled in the 30-year void with stories from our separate lives. I learned about his childhood with Helen and James, largely happy, though marked by Helen's occasional inexplicable melancholy and overprotectiveness. He shared his journey from precocious student to tech entrepreneur, the drive that had propelled him to success, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied it. In return, I told him about my early promise as a pianist, my whirlwind romance with Jonathan, the gradual dissolution of our marriage after the supposed loss of our child. I spoke of rebuilding my life after the divorce, the humiliation of serving former friends at the hotel, the quiet dignity I'd fought to maintain. With each exchange, the invisible threads connecting us strengthened, creating something that wasn't quite the traditional mother-son bond, but was undeniably powerful in its own right. One evening in early spring, Ethan arrived for dinner with an unexpected proposal. I've been thinking about your piano playing, he said as we finished our meal. About what you said regarding it being too late to return to music professionally. Oh? I raised an eyebrow, having noticed his methodical approach when he had something specific in mind. The foundation is hosting its official launch gala next month. We need a musical component. His eyes held mine steadily. I'd like you to perform. The suggestion sent a jolt of both excitement and terror through me. Ethan, I haven't performed publicly in over 30 years, which makes it the perfect symbolic beginning for the foundation, he countered, reclaiming what was lost, second chances. He leaned forward slightly. You're still brilliant, Olivia. I've heard you play during our dinners. The talent is still there. There's a vast difference between playing casually during dinner and performing at a gala in front of donors and board members, I protested. You have 6 weeks to prepare. His confidence in me was both flattering and terrifying. Just one piece, something meaningful to you. I wanted to refuse, to retreat to the safety of anonymity I'd grown accustomed to. Yet something in his unwavering belief made me reconsider. Perhaps this was part of my own reclamation, my own second chance. I'll think about it, I said finally. His smile, so rarely seen but transformative when it appeared, told me he knew he'd won. That night after Ethan left, I sat at my piano, really sat with purpose, for the first time in decades. My fingers moved over the keys, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as I played through pieces I'd once known by heart. Muscle memory was a remarkable thing. My hands remembered what my conscious mind had almost forgotten. By midnight, I'd made my decision. I would perform at the gala, not just for Ethan or for the foundation, but for myself, for the young woman who had surrendered her dreams too easily, who had lost so much but was finally finding her way back. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. I practiced religiously each morning, rediscovering the discipline and joy of immersing myself in music. Ethan arranged for my piano to be professionally restored, a practical necessity he insisted when I protested the expense. 2 weeks before the gala, an elegant dress arrived at my apartment, midnight blue with subtle silver accents that complemented my now fully silver hair. The card simply read, "For your triumphant return, E." The night of the gala arrived with alarming swiftness. The venue was a historic concert hall in the city, its gilded interior aglow with soft lighting. I waited backstage, my heart hammering against my ribs, questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. Ethan found me there, immaculate in his tuxedo, but with an uncharacteristic nervousness about him. "Are you ready?" he asked, adjusting his cufflinks, a habit I'd noticed emerged when he was anxious. "As I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my already smooth dress. "The hall is filling up?" "It's at capacity. Many of the city's most influential families are in attendance." He hesitated. "There's something I should tell you. Jonathan is here." My head snapped up. "What? Why would he—" "I invited him," Ethan said, his expression unreadable. I thought he should witness what his actions ultimately led to. The foundation, your performance, our relationship. The good that has emerged from his deception. The complexity of emotions in Ethan's voice, not vindictiveness but something more nuanced, gave me pause. This wasn't about revenge but about completion, about bringing the full circle of our story into one room. "Are you angry?" Ethan asked when I remained silent. "No," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "No, I'm not angry. Jonathan is part of this story, however unwillingly. Perhaps he should be here to see its resolution." Relief flickered across Ethan's face. "There's one more thing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this made for you, for tonight." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a crescent moon crafted from white gold, small diamonds marking its curve, the birthmark that had connected us, transformed into something beautiful. "Ethan," I breathed, momentarily speechless. "It's perfect." He fastened it around my wrist, covering my birthmark precisely. "For luck," he said simply, "though you won't need it." When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage with my head high, the weight of 30 years of silence and loss lifting with each step. The grand piano waited, gleaming under the stage lights. I took my seat, adjusted my posture, and let my hands hover over the keys for just a moment. The piece I'd chosen was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a composition of such profound beauty and emotional depth that it had always moved me, even in my darkest moments. As I began to play, the hall faded away, and there was only the music, flowing through my fingers, expressing everything words could not. I played for the young pianist whose career had been set aside. I played for the mother who had grieved an emptiness for 30 years. I played for the son who had been stolen and found against impossible odds. And somewhere in the piece, as the melody soared and my fingers moved with newfound confidence, I even played for Jonathan. Not in forgiveness exactly, but in acknowledgement that his terrible choice had ultimately led to this moment of beauty and reclamation. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the applause began, hesitant at first, then building to a sustained ovation that brought tears to my eyes. I rose, bowing slightly, my gaze finding Ethan in the front row, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, more fundamental. As I left the stage, I caught a glimpse of Jonathan near the back of the hall, his face unreadable in the shadows. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and I offered the smallest of nods, not absolution, but recognition. Then I turned away, moving toward the future rather than the past. Backstage, Ethan was waiting. "That," he said softly, "was extraordinary. Thank you for pushing me to do it," I replied, my hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline and emotion. I'd forgotten how it felt to make music like that, to create something beautiful from pain. "Isn't that what we're doing with all of this?" he asked, gesturing toward the hall, the foundation, the new reality we were building together, creating something meaningful from what was meant to destroy us. The wisdom in his observation, so profound, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. This brilliant man, my son yet not raised by me, had somehow distilled the essence of our shared journey into a single perfect truth. "Yes," I said finally. "I believe that's exactly what we're doing." Summer arrived with unexpected opportunities. The Foundation's launch had generated significant publicity, leading to media interest in my personal story, carefully edited to protect the privacy of all involved. My performance at the gala had caught the attention of the city's music community, resulting in an invitation to teach master classes at my former conservatory. "It's like the universe is conspiring to give you back everything you lost," Diana remarked one afternoon as we reviewed grant applications for the foundation, just in a different form. Her observation struck me as profoundly true. The pieces of my former life were returning, transformed by time and experience into something new, something that perhaps fit better than the original ever had. Ethan and I settled into a comfortable rhythm of regular dinners and foundation work, our relationship deepening through shared purpose and gradual revelations. The awkwardness of our early interactions gave way to a familiar ease that sometimes startled me with its naturalness. "I have a proposition," Ethan said during one of our weekly dinners at my apartment. "The Phoenix Tech Board retreat is next month in Tuscany. I'd like you to join me." I nearly dropped my fork. "Tuscany? With your executive board?" "Not as a board member," he clarified, "though you'd be welcome at some of the sessions. I thought you might enjoy the villa we've rented. There's a beautiful antique piano, and the countryside is spectacular for painting." He hesitated. "And I'd value having you there." The invitation touched me deeply. This wasn't foundation business or obligation. This was Ethan simply wanting my company, wanting to include me in an important aspect of his life. "I'd be honored," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Though I'm not sure what I'd tell your colleagues about who I am." A complicated expression crossed his face. "I've been thinking about that, about how we present our relationship to the world." He set down his glass deliberately. "The truth is, I'm proud to have found you. I don't want to hide our connection behind vague explanations or half-truths. You want to tell people that I'm your mother?" The words still felt strange on my tongue, applied to this accomplished man across the table. "Yes," he said simply. "Not the complete circumstances. Those remain private. But the fundamental truth that you are my biological mother and that we found each other after many years of separation." The matter-of-fact way he claimed our connection brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Are you sure? It could raise questions about Helen and James, about your background." "I've made my peace with those complexities," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Helen remains the woman who raised me, who shaped much of who I am. That doesn't change. But you are also my mother, by blood and now by choice. I see no reason to deny either truth." His clarity, his ability to hold these seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously, never failed to impress me. In this, he was nothing like Jonathan, whose worldview allowed for only one version of reality, his own. "Then I would be honored to accompany you to Tuscany," I said, "as your mother." The retreat was even more beautiful than Ethan had described. The villa, perched on a Tuscan hillside surrounded by cypress trees and vineyards, dated back to the 16th century. My room overlooked a terraced garden that tumbled down to a small lake, the landscape straight from a Renaissance painting. On our second evening there, following a day of board meetings I'd politely declined to attend, Ethan found me at the antique grand piano in the villa's music room, experimenting with a Schubert piece I'd once known by heart. "The board members are asking about you," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "They're intrigued by my mysterious silver-haired companion who plays like a concert pianist." I laughed softly. "Hardly concert level anymore. You underestimate yourself." He entered the room fully, taking a seat in a nearby armchair. "I've invited them for drinks before dinner. I thought, if you're comfortable with it, I might introduce you properly." Understanding his meaning immediately, I nodded. "I'm ready if you are." When the board members gathered on the terrace an hour later, a collection of tech executives, venture capitalists, and industry pioneers, Ethan drew me to his side with a gentle hand on my elbow. "I'd like to introduce you all to Olivia Reeves," he said, his voice carrying easily across the terrace. "My mother." The surprised murmurs were immediate, followed by curious glances between us, noting, no doubt, the similarities in our features that became obvious once named. "I thought your parents were Helen and James Morgan," said one board member, a direct woman I'd been introduced to as the former CEO of a major tech firm. "James and Helen raised me," Ethan confirmed. "I was separated from Olivia as an infant through circumstances beyond her control. We reconnected recently after 30 years apart." The simplicity of his explanation, truthful while protecting the more painful details, silenced further questions. The group accepted his narrative with respectful interest, several members approaching me individually throughout the evening with genuine warmth. Later, as we walked through the moonlit gardens after the others had retired, I found myself overwhelmed by the ease with which Ethan had claimed our connection publicly. "Thank you," I said finally, "for acknowledging me so openly." "I should be thanking you," he replied, surprising me, "for your grace in accepting a son who appeared in your life so suddenly with so many complications attached." "You could never be a complication," I assured him. "A miracle, perhaps, but never a complication." We stopped at a stone balustrade overlooking the valley below, the distant lights of a small town twinkling like earthbound stars. In the soft moonlight, I could see both Jonathan and myself in Ethan's profile, the determined set of his jaw, the thoughtful expression that had once been my hallmark. "I've been thinking about Helen's journals," Ethan said unexpectedly, "about something she wrote when I was 10. She said watching me grow was both her greatest joy and her deepest guilt, that every milestone she witnessed was one stolen from you." The complex emotion in his voice, grief for his adoptive mother mingled with regret for what I had missed, touched me deeply. "Helen loved you," I said gently. "Whatever her role in what happened, she gave you a good life, a loving home. I can't hate her for that. Even though she took your child, she took you physically," I acknowledged. "But the connection between us remained, invisible, unknown, but real. The same blood, the same birthmark, the same musical talent. She couldn't erase those things, however much Jonathan might have wanted to sever all ties." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing my perspective. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said after a moment. "Something that might seem strange given everything that's happened." "Go ahead. Would you tell me the story of the day I was born? Not the aftermath, but the beginning. What you felt when you knew I was coming. What you hoped for." The request caught me off guard. So fundamental, so primal. Every child deserves to know the story of their beginning, yet this basic narrative had been stolen from him along with everything else. "You were eager to arrive," I began, my voice soft with memory. "Almost 3 months early. I was playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata when the first contraction hit, so strong it made me miss a note. I knew immediately you were coming, though the doctors tried to stop the labor. I described the rush to the hospital, the fear mingled with determination, the fierce, protective love I'd felt even as everything moved too quickly, too dangerously. When they finally placed you in my arms, you were so tiny, barely 4 pounds. But your grip was strong when you wrapped your fingers around mine. I touched my wrist where the crescent birthmark lay beneath my bracelet. And when I saw this mark on your wrist, identical to my own, I knew you were truly mine, truly a part of me." Ethan listened with absolute focus, absorbing this origin story, his story, with visible emotion. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the chirp of crickets from the garden below. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rough, "for giving me that beginning, for fighting for me from the start. Always," I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Then and now, in the silvery Tuscan moonlight, with the weight of 30 years of separation behind us and an uncertain but promising future ahead, we stood together, not a conventional mother and son, but something perhaps more hard-won and precious for all its complexity. Autumn painted the city in amber and crimson, a year of transformations drawing to its close. The foundation had flourished beyond our initial expectations, helping dozens of families navigate situations painfully similar to our own. Each success story felt like a small redemption, each reunion an echo of our own impossible finding. My return to music had evolved from the single performance at the gala to regular masterclasses and occasional intimate recitals. I'd declined more public opportunities, preferring the quiet satisfaction of teaching promising students and playing for small, appreciative audiences. At 53, I had no interest in the demanding life of a touring musician. This measured return to my first love was enough. Ethan had integrated me into his life with a naturalness that sometimes took my breath away. He introduced me as his mother without qualification or explanation, weathering the occasional raised eyebrow or curious glance with unflappable composure. In business settings, we maintained appropriate boundaries. He was still the visionary CEO, I the foundation director. But in private, our relationship continued to deepen through small revelations and shared experiences. I hadn't seen Jonathan since the Foundation Gala, though I occasionally glimpsed his name in legal journals, noting his conspicuous absence from major cases and events. According to Ethan, who monitored such things with characteristic thoroughness, Jonathan had sold his lavish apartment and relocated to a smaller residence in Connecticut, his once prominent social life notably diminished. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a muted sense that justice had, in its imperfect way, been served. The man who had orchestrated my greatest loss had lost much himself, not through our vindictiveness, but through the natural consequences of his own actions finally catching up to him. One crisp October morning, as leaves drifted past my apartment windows like fragments of flame, my phone rang with Ethan's distinctive tone. "Are you busy this afternoon?" he asked without preamble, directness being another quality he'd either inherited or developed independently. "Nothing that can't be rescheduled," I replied, mentally reviewing my day's modest commitments. "What did you have in mind?" "There's somewhere I'd like us to visit. Together." His tone held an unusual gravity. "I'll pick you up at 2 if that works." Curiosity piqued, I agreed, wondering what location could inspire such solemnity in his usually measured voice. When his car arrived, he was driving himself rather than using his usual service, another sign of the occasion's personal nature. I was waiting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a camel coat against the autumn chill. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, a gesture that had become natural between us over the months. As we drove, leaving the city behind for the wooded suburbs beyond, I began to suspect our destination. When we turned onto the tree-lined drive of Riverside Cemetery, my suspicion crystallized into certainty. "We're going to the grave," I said softly, not a question. Ethan nodded, his hands perfectly positioned on the steering wheel, eyes focused on the winding cemetery road. "I've never visited it. Seemed like something we should do together." The small headstone sat beneath a sugar maple that had turned brilliant crimson, nature's vivid counterpoint to the somber gray granite. "Ethan Jonathan Reeves," the inscription read, "Beloved son, April 14th, 1995. A perfect fiction. A grave for a child who had never died, visited for years by a mother whose grief had been built on elaborate lies. We stood before it in silence, autumn leaves swirling around our feet. After a moment, Ethan placed a small white stone atop the headstone, a gesture I recognized from my own family's Jewish traditions, though I'd never discussed these roots with him. "Helen's family was Jewish," he said, noticing my surprise. "She taught me this custom when we visited her parents' graves." Another unexpected connection, another thread that had existed unseen between us all these years. "I used to bring blue irises," I said, gazing at the barren plot. "They only bloom in spring, but I'd find them somewhere every month for years. The cemetery gardener would clear away the previous month's flowers, withered and dry by then. He was always kind, never mentioning that I was the only one who ever visited." Ethan's hand found mine, warm and solid. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," he said simply. "All those years of grieving alone." "But I'm not grieving anymore," I replied, the realization striking me with sudden clarity. "For the first time in 30 years, I'm not carrying that weight." We stood together as the wind whispered through the maple, dislodging more crimson leaves that danced around the small headstone like benedictions. "What happens to it now?" Ethan asked finally. "The grave." I considered this. "It remains, I suppose, a marker, not for a death, but for a beginning. The place where one chapter ended and another, a much longer one, began." He nodded, understanding, as he always did, the layers beneath my words. We turned away from the grave together, walking back toward the car beneath a canopy of autumn glory. "I have something for you," he said, as we drove back toward the city. "It's in the glove compartment." Inside was a small blue envelope. I opened it to find an elegantly printed invitation, Phoenix Tech, in collaboration with the Reeves Foundation for Family Justice, requests the honor of your presence at the dedication of the Helen Morgan Memorial Wing University Children's Hospital, November 15th, 7 p.m. I looked at Ethan, momentarily speechless. "The wing will specialize in neonatal care for premature infants," he explained, eyes on the road ahead. "State-of-the-art facilities, research programs, support services for families. Everything Helen dedicated her professional life to, but with additional resources she never had access to. "It's a beautiful tribute," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. She would have been proud. "I wanted to be sure you'd be comfortable with it," Ethan said, glancing at me briefly, given her role in our separation. "Helen made a terrible choice," I acknowledged, "but she also gave you a good life, a loving home. The world isn't divided neatly into heroes and villains, much as we might sometimes wish it were." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "That's what I hoped you'd say." At a stoplight, he turned to face me fully. "There's something else. The dedication ceremony falls on the first anniversary of when we met, when you served me at the Windsor. I thought perhaps you might perform at the dedication, something to mark the occasion." The symmetry of it struck me, my return to music happening alongside Ethan's public acknowledgement of both his mothers, the woman who raised him and the woman who gave him life. "I'd be honored," I said. The dedication ceremony was attended by the city's medical and philanthropic elite, a sea of formal attire and polite applause. I sat in the front row as Ethan delivered a moving speech about Helen's dedication to neonatal medicine, about second chances and the power of modern medical intervention. "My own life," he said toward the end, his gaze finding mine, "began under the most precarious circumstances, a premature birth with uncertain prospects. Through medical expertise and extraordinary care, I survived and thrived. This wing will ensure that other children and families receive the same chances I was given." The careful wording, truthful while strategic in its omissions, demonstrated again Ethan's gift for navigating complex ethical waters. He honored Helen's professional legacy while acknowledging, however obliquely, the reality of his own beginning. When I took my place at the grand piano positioned in the hospital's soaring atrium, I felt a profound sense of completion. The piece I'd chosen, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, flowed from my fingers with effortless grace, its intricate patterns speaking of order emerging from chaos, beauty from complexity. As the final notes resonated through the space, I caught Ethan's eye across the room. In that moment of silent communion, I felt the circuit of our extraordinary journey complete itself. Mother and son, separated and found, creating something meaningful from what had been meant to divide us. Later, as we shared a quiet dinner at my apartment, just the two of us, no foundation business or social obligations, Ethan raised his glass in a toast. "To finding what was lost," he said simply. I touched my glass to his, the soft chime like a bell marking the hour. "And to building what never existed before." Outside my windows, the first snowflakes of winter began their silent descent, transforming the city into something new and pristine. Inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, sat the most unexpected and precious gift of my life. My son, returned to me against impossible odds, both of us forever changed by the journey. Not a fairy tale ending, too complex, too nuanced for such simplicity, but an ending nonetheless that contained within it the seeds of countless new beginnings. For us and for the families, our foundation would help in years to come. "I was thinking," Ethan said, setting down his glass, "about next steps for the foundation. There's a program in Europe I'd like us to explore, a model for family reunification that's shown promising results." As he outlined his vision, I listened with the awareness that this shared purpose, this mutual respect, this hard-won connection, was the real miracle. Not just finding each other, but finding in each other the perfect complement, the missing piece that made both our lives more complete. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the past year's transformations in a clean white blanket. Nature's reminder that even the most indelible marks can be softened, that new growth always waits beneath the surface, ready to emerge when its season arrives.